strategy of advocating for rights. And one of the great things about litigation is that it forces the government to answer. A government might not answer your RTI, they might not answer your protest, they might not answer your calls for changing the policy, but the court will order the government to answer your petition. And in the DevikaBiswas case, we've received 6 responses so far, mainly at the court's urgings. And one of the responses we received was from Delhi. And NCT Delhi doesn't necessarily get as much attention as other states do. So after we received this reply, we wanted to investigate. So the counter affidavit from Delhi says that the facts in the DevikaBiswas case do not apply to Delhi. That Delhi fully complies with the Supreme Court order in Ramakant Rai, meaning all of the doctors are impaneled, all of the facilities are accredited, they use consent forms as per the guidelines, the insurance scheme covers any potential complications or failures, counseling is always done, there's clinical assessment, post-operation checkups, adequate drugs, and safety is always respected. Delhi also said that there are no camps conducted within NCT Delhi, except for one every year, interestingly called at the International Trade Fair. They've reviewed all of the cases, and in 9 areas within Delhi, there has not been one complaint of negligence. And most interestingly, in the reply, this is a direct quote from the reply, it is hereby submitted that no, and the lawyer from Delhi put this in quotations, that no rights of sterilization-seeking clients are jeopardized, and healthcare personnel are bound by professional ethics to treat their clients with dignity. How seriously is the lawyer from Delhi taking the rights of sterilization seekers in Delhi? He put them in quotation marks, right? So because of our litigation, we can see the government's attitude towards women's rights in Delhi. And it's that they're rights, in quotation marks. So it's a very enlightening piece of information we receive as a result of this litigation. In short, they could have replied with just this one sentence, we do everything perfectly by the book. So we at HRLN received this reply from Delhi and we said, okay, let's go into the field and see how beautiful an example NCT Delhi is when it comes to sterilization of women. Just to give you an idea of healthcare in Delhi, this is the context that these perfect rights-based sterilizations are rights-based. Sterilizations are being conducted in the capital. There's a shortage of sub-centers. 42 sub-centers are missing from Delhi. A shortage of primary healthcare centers. There are 0 CHCs in Delhi. There are almost no male health workers in Delhi. There's a shortage of obstetricians, gynecologists, pediatricians, specialists, pharmacists, and nurses at all levels. This is a family that we spoke to in the fact-finding. So what did we find about family planning in Delhi? Actually, it's a mirror of family planning throughout India. Like Carla says, family planning in India means sterilization, and more specifically, female sterilization. Just some context setting, 35% of women between the ages of 35 and 49 are sterilized in Delhi. Interestingly, and this is something that comes from what everyone has been saying, women who have at least 10 years of education are half as likely to get sterilized as women with lower literacy, because like he was saying, they're easier targets and they have less information about other forms of contraception. They have less choice. 59% of women in Delhi received monetary compensation, which is fairly low considering that's one of the driving factors for sterilization. And only 22.6% of sterilized women in Delhi were informed about potential side effects of the surgery. This is an operation that women are going through, and they're not told about the potential impacts they could face. The woman here in the picture is Preeti, who was sterilized in a government hospital in Delhi. So we visited 2 different slum areas in Delhi. We interviewed government workers, community members, and we also went to two government hospitals and 1 private charity hospital. So very brief fact-finding just to get a glimpse of family planning in Delhi. So we first went to Jagiwan Ram Memorial Hospital, which, like pretty much every public facility in India, is unclean. There was trash on the floor. It was filthy. The labor ward had old cracked mattresses. Most of them had no sheets, multiple women per bed. The doctor on duty told our fact-finding team that women from the slum have many children because they are uneducated, and so we have to convince them to use contraception. And by contraception, the doctor meant sterilization. Of course, the birth control pill is not an option for these uneducated women, according to this doctor, because they will not obey, again his words, and take the medicine on a daily basis. You see, an entirely dehumanizing viewpoint when it comes to poor, uneducated women. And the doctor also freely admitted that there is no counseling because the hospital only has 4 doctors, even though it's seeing up to 300 antenatal patients a day. So severely, the doctors cannot, even if they wanted to, they cannot do any family planning counseling with the women coming into their facility. So then we went into the slum area that this hospital serves. We talked to 23 women, and they described their experiences going to the hospital when it comes to family planning. After their first child, they're pressured into getting a copper T. And many of the women have complications. One of the doctors told us that these complications arise because women often receive the copper T immediately after delivery, and their bodies aren't always ready for the copper T. When the women do have complications, they return to the hospital, but because of targets and lack of staff and lack of time, the doctors will refuse follow-up care. They refuse to remove the copper T. If women have a second child, that's when they're pressured into sterilization, unless, of course, they have 2 daughters, in which case, try again. Sterilization is heavily promoted by the staff. If the women ask questions, then only will the doctors discuss any alternate forms of contraception. Next slide, please. So this is a Dai that the fact-finding team spoke with. She also gave us information about women's interactions with the hospital staff. Mainly that women are terrified of going to the hospital. That even if they do reach the hospital for delivery or any other treatment, they're screamed at, they're scolded, they're reprimanded, there are huge crowds, there's pushing and shoving, and sometimes women leave. Also, some women will leave the hospital as their baby is crowning, like as they're in delivery, because they're so terrified of what the hospital staff will do to them. There's no privacy at the hospital. Women will often be fully exposed while male doctors are wandering around. Women are not giving any context as to why this man is coming and looking at their naked bodies. So again, they leave the hospital. And women who have more than 3 children are dismissed from the hospital and not treated at all. In terms of sterilizations at this hospital, there's no incentives given, even when they're promised. And women are always sent home the same day of their sterilization, despite the fact that they still might be recovering from anesthesia. So this is the local Dai who gave us this information. So this woman here, her name is Saroj. She's roughly 30. She has 3 children. They were all delivered at home, normal deliveries with the Dai. She tried to go to the hospital when she was delivering her first child, but she became too terrified and she left. In 2009, she went to a public hospital for her sterilization. She received no test, no counseling. Only her husband signed a consent form that she never saw. She was terrified by what she saw around her. There were 10 or 15 other women in hospital gowns. Men were walking around even though the women were exposed. And then after their sterilization, they were put on mats on the floor. She told one of the doctors or men there, she said, "I'm scared. I don't want to do this." And he said, "Don't worry," and he gave her a shot. And that's the last thing she remembered, until she woke up and she was lying on a mat on top of many other women. She was in pain, she had nausea, she was feeling drugged. And the only staff person in the room was a cleaner. So she couldn't ask for help. She felt desperate, she got up and she left without any papers, without any medical follow-up. She removed her own stitches at home, despite the intense risk of infection. And she thought she would receive an incentive, but she received no payment. This is another woman who had a very similar experience in a government hospital. Again, only her husband signed the consent form and she didn't know what it said. Her stitches after, again, no post-operative care, her stitches became infected, they were bleeding. When she went to the hospital, the nurses yelled at her because she was unclean and she had allowed the infection to happen. 20 days after her stitches were removed, she continued to, the infection persisted, and she had a second operation and had to stay in the hospital while being scolded and while being in filth and terrible conditions. So she's returned to the hospital since to complain about bleeding, about problems at her infection site, and the hospital just dismisses her. They've given her medication for depression and birth control pills. And like Kalpana was saying yesterday, these are drugs that should be given with a prescription, with medical consultation. When the fact-finding team spoke with Maltese, she gave us the birth control pills and said, "What are these for? I don't understand what my doctor gave me." This is a woman who's already had 2 sterilization surgeries. She's being given birth control at the same time. So the second public hospital we visited was Dr. Baba Saheb, where a lot of the women had had their sterilizations. Again, you can see it's very dirty, and the hospital staff was very taciturn. They did not want to speak with the fact-finding team. This is, so we also visited the slum area that this hospital serves. It's the living conditions are terrible. There's no sewage, no drainage, no sanitation. We spoke to doctors at a local charity clinic there who told us that they're trying to promote alternate forms of contraception, but that they're really struggling because the government promotes sterilization so heavily. So we spoke to this ASHA worker who described sterilization camps to us and said that they're conducted in the morning, but that because the doctors want to go home by 4, the women are sent home by 4 regardless of their condition. And of course, no sanitary conditions, no clean gauze, no post-operative instructions, no medications. This woman had a sterilization in a camp. She had also a similarly terrible experience. She actually wanted to get an abortion and a sterilization at the same time. When she went, they said the machine for the abortion was broken, so the doctor would be doing it by hand. Subsequently, a piece of the fetus remained in her body. She had a terrible infection and continued bleeding for months after her procedure. She had to have a subsequent operation from a private doctor and paid rupees 4,000 for the procedure. So the key issues we've seen are really echoed throughout cases in India. Especially in Delhi, there's no incentive payment, problems with the copper tea, no care, no information, no counseling, a total disregard for the autonomy of the women in the slum areas. And much like the Delhi government lawyer who said that these women's rights are not being violated, there's no respect for the fundamental dignity, the lives, or the well-being of the women who visit these hospitals for their delivery needs and their family planning needs. So we will be filing this fact-finding as a response to the government of Delhi's answer. And the 6 states that we've responded to, we're doing the same thing. And as the responses continue to come in from governments throughout India, we'll be doing the same thing. Because a PIL shows how much the government cares about your issue. And it allows you to answer the government in a very direct way. And that's one really unique thing that you can get from a PIL. So in the afternoon sessions, we'll be discussing this case a little bit more and some of the reliefs and the way forward. And we hope that you'll participate in that conversation after lunch. And if you have any questions or things you'd like to add, that will be the time for that as well. Thanks.